We have a special guest with us right now. Mark Crispin Miller is a noted social critic and professor of media, culture, and communication at New York University. He is the author of numerous books, including Boxed In, The Bush Dyslexicon, and Fooled Again. I read The Bush Dyslexicon. In 2020, NYU launched an investigation into Miller after fellow faculty members complained about his unorthodox views and coverage of controversial topics, including COVID. His writings currently appear on his Substack titled Notes from the Underground. Please welcome Mark Crispin Miller. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jimmy. It's great to be here.
So please tell everybody this story, right? So here's a headline to this article: New York University ignores academic freedom, investigates Mark Crispin Miller's course content. And now tell me what this is about.
Yeah, well, it's really an amazing epic of folly and ignorance. It starts back in September of 2020. I think of that as year one, right, of the New World Order. I was teaching my propaganda course as usual. I'd been teaching it for about 20 years. It was a very popular course. And I was teaching it as usual, except for the fact that we were meeting remotely, right? So in explaining the premise of the course to the students, I pointed that out. As usual, I said to them, this course is very different from propaganda courses taught at most other universities, because at the Ivy League schools and other places, professors tend to teach propaganda in a kind of antiquarian spirit. That is, they'll look back at the Bolsheviks, they'll look back at the Nazis, right? And the unspoken assumption there is that propaganda is not something we do. Propaganda is a totalitarian thing. They did it. We don't do it. I pointed out to them that while we would be studying the history of propaganda, because you have to look at where you've been to understand where you are, our main focus was going to be on propaganda in real time. We were going to focus either on propaganda drives going on right now, or at least recent enough drives that the students could remember them, right? Because if they don't remember them, if they're not experiencing them, it doesn't really matter that much. And in any case, what's the point of teaching propaganda if you're not going to arm students with the critical skills they need to be able to test the truth claims of propaganda and figure out if it's true or false? And I said to them, that's what we're going to be doing in here. Now, I warned them that when you teach propaganda, when you study it thoroughly and impartially, you're inevitably going to discover that certain things that you have believed yourself, sometimes fervently believed, are actually false. I mean, this is an experience that I think every thoughtful person has. I continue to have it, and I'm much older than those students. And I warned them that if you take this seriously, the same thing's going to happen to you, and it can be very jarring psychologically. It can also be difficult socially, because if you talk to your family or you talk to your roommates or your friends about what you're studying in this course and what you've discovered, you'll often get pushback. I pointed all this out. I said, now, this semester, what might we talk about? Well, look at how we're meeting, right? We're meeting remotely. You hate this, I hate this. Why are we doing it? Well, obviously, we're doing it because of COVID. Now, COVID has been driven from the beginning, and this is what, 8 months, by a number of very powerful propaganda themes. And I made clear that doesn't mean they're false, because propaganda does not have to be false, but it does tend to be a little bit simplistic and one-sided. So there have been a number of propaganda themes. We've all heard them. We're kind of living by them now. We could talk about any of those in here, and you could write your papers on one of those. I said, for example, take masks, okay? It may interest you to know. This is where I stepped in it, Jimmy.
Yes, here it comes. If you guys been wondering, what did he say? This is what he said that got him in trouble 8 months into COVID. Go ahead.
Brace yourself, because it is pretty heinous. I said, it may interest you to know that all the randomized controlled trials of masking in hospitals. I thought there were 8 at the time. There were actually 10 back then. I said all 8 of them have found that masks don't prevent transmission of respiratory viruses. Now, if we study this in here, or if you write your papers on this, you will want to read all of those studies, and you will also want to read the more recent studies that have come out finding otherwise. So in other words, you got to read all the studies, right? All of them. And I gave them tips on how non-scientists might try to assess the quality of new studies. There are certain things that they could do. All right. Now,
this is called doing your own research, and you're not supposed to do this. Even if you're a college professor, you're not supposed to read about COVID. You're not supposed to read about masks or vaccines or anything to do with the virus or anything. And so you're breaking the first cardinal sin of liberal shittery, is that you're going to the source material and getting informed yourself and not taking someone's word for it that you hear from an authority like Dr. Fauci or Collins or Rachel Maddow.
Well, that's right. And if you do question what comes down from those eminent figures, you are necessarily a Trump supporter,
yes, which
are a Nazi. Okay. Well, I'm getting ahead of our narrative here. The following week, a student who had joined the class late, was sitting there. I could see her in the little box on the screen. As the subject of masks and the studies came up again, one of the other students brought it up again. We had a back and forth about it. And I could see that she looked unhappy, right? She didn't say anything. Well, this was on a Thursday. On the following Monday, she went on Twitter and she demanded that I be fired for putting the students at risk. She was also enraged because she had called the bias hotline at NYU to complain about me. I don't know what my bias was. I guess it was an anti-mask bias. And she wanted them to take steps to deal with the problem, and they wouldn't, to their credit. All right, that was ridiculous. It's never happened to me before. I do wish she had aired her grievances in class, because when students disagree in a class like that, it's extremely fruitful, right? But she didn't. She just flipped out. She demanded that I be fired. It's not that big a deal in itself. But what happened next was a pretty big deal. And this was that NYU basically took her side, okay? My department chair tweeted his thanks to her and wrote, "We as a department have made this a priority and are discussing next steps."
Wow.
This is staggering to me, because I hadn't been included in any discussions of getting me out of there, Then the next day, the dean of the school I teach in and the doctor who dictated COVID policy at NYU emailed all my other students without putting me on copy and basically warned them that I had given them dangerous misinformation.
Wow.
Sent a list of links to the studies they should read and that they should believe. And those were the recent studies, that find masks do work. So these two bureaucrats basically told my students what to think, which is the last thing that I or any worthwhile professor ever do. The point is to teach them how to think, not what to think. Then finally, I was asked, which means told, not to teach the propaganda course.
Wow.
Following semester. And as it happens, Jimmy, I have not been allowed to teach it since.
No kidding.
I can't teach it anymore at NYU. Not allowed. And the thing that's tragic about that is, I'm sure you'll agree with me here, if there's any subject that we urgently need to teach students to understand, and not just students, but adults, it's propaganda. I mean, propaganda is the most serious, the most existentially threatening pandemic of our time. It's the spread of lies through the media that are putting us at serious risk. I mean, it's really a matter of life and death. So to forbid me to teach it, because a student's nose was out of joint about what I'd said about masks and so on, is really foolish. But the story only gets better, okay? I had no choice but to accept all this, but I told my chair that I was doing it under protest.
Did you hire a lawyer?
Well, not yet.
Okay.
I put up a petition at change.org, and it's still up. All it did was ask that NYU respect my academic freedom, right? And set a good example for other universities, because as you'll remember, in 2020, professors were being gagged and, canceled and fired, scientists, doctors. It was a moment of what felt like unprecedented censorship, of all kinds of people whom we should actually be listening to. So I put up this petition, made my case, said NYU should, set this good example and respect my academic freedom. It was really pretty harmless. But about a month later, I got an email from my dean informing me that I was going to be, that my conduct was under scrutiny. I was going to be the subject of an expedited review at the request of my department colleagues, and he attached their letter to him. Okay, this is where things really took off. I mean, we were really in the twilight zone now. None of them had talked to me. This is about 25 of my department colleagues. I hadn't heard from any of them. They sent this letter to the dean accusing me not only of telling my students not to wear masks in violation of university policy, and they said a New York state law. I mean, there was no such law. And I had not only intimidated the students who were wearing masks in class, but we were online, so nobody was wearing a mask. But they then jumped into the wild blue yonder by accusing me of explicit hate speech, attacks on students and others in our community, advocating for an unsafe learning environment, assailing my students with non-evidence-based theories, which means conspiracy theories, and microaggressions and aggressions. So this was like the censorship trifecta. Do you know what I mean? I was accused of I was a COVID heretic because I questioned masking. I had sinned against woke etiquette, right? Hate speech. And I can explain what they meant by that if you're interested. And I was guilty of conspiracy theory. I mean, this was really an amazing document. And the dean went ahead and ordered the review. He told me, interestingly, that he had no choice because the university's lawyers had told him he must, which is, I think, probably significant. Let's put that aside. Meanwhile, I wrote back to my colleagues. I rebutted their letter point by point. I asked for a retraction and an apology. They ignored me. I sent a follow-up letter. I asked the same thing. I said, by November 20th, please retract this and apologize. There's not a word of truth to it. They ignored me. So I sued them for libel. And the libel suit is ongoing, And one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is I wanted to, discuss the status of that suit. But you may have other questions.
No, go ahead. What is the status?
Well, they got themselves a lawyer and they filed a motion to dismiss. Okay, we're staying in Wonderland now for a few more minutes. Ordinarily, judges rule on motions to dismiss right away, but the judge in this case waited a whole year. And when he finally ruled, he ruled that we had not proved actual malice, which kind of blew my lawyer's mind because it was abundantly obvious that there was malice here, so we had to appeal. We appealed. We appealed to the Intermediate Appellate Court. They got back to us a few months later. They agreed that there was actual malice, but, and this is what's not only surprising, but really dangerous. They ruled that what my colleagues wrote about me was pure opinion and therefore protected by the First Amendment.
So what you're saying isn't protected by the First Amendment, but when they falsely accuse you of doing something, that's protected by the First Amendment, even though the things you were saying actually have the science on your side and you were correct.
Well, all I was doing was recommending that people read the science,
right?
Correct. That's all I was doing. You put your finger on it. what's dangerous about this suit is that the decision has set a precedent whereby anyone in the United States who is accused of libel can point to this decision and say, "It's just my opinion." So you can say, well, I know for a fact that Jimmy Dore has sex with goats and he has, child pornography on his computer. This is a fact. I know this. And then you sue me for libel, as you have every right to do. And I'll point to this case and I'll say, no, this is my opinion. And the court will say, yeah, well, there's a precedent for this. So it is, right? So it means that the have-nots, those who are weaker in the system, are now at a real serious disadvantage, because if this decision stands, it will be possible to dismiss any libel suit on those spurious grounds. Now, we have appealed again. We've appealed to the Court of Appeals in Albany, which is the highest court in New York State, and we don't yet know if they're going to take it. If they don't take it, it's over. Okay, I will have lost. That decision will stand as a precedent, and my colleagues will have gotten away scot-free. Although what they wrote about me meets the sort of classic definition of defamation. They made claims that they claimed were factual claims, but now they'll be able to say, well, this is just our opinion, our point of view.
Wow, that's it's quite a story. And, I've heard stories like this from other people like Dr. Jay Bhattacharya and Dr. Cariardi also, that they were shocked to see their own colleagues turn their back on a value, which is, protecting ideas and vigorous debate and freedom of speech. And they all turned their back on it, and they tried to cancel you. They tried to cancel them, and they did get some people fired. Well, you're not allowed to teach that course anymore.
Well, that's right. I'm not allowed to teach the course. I have friends, acquaintances throughout the hemisphere who've been fired for various, COVIDian sins and so on, sins against so-called social justice. This is a very, very, we're in a frightening place right now, it seems to me. Free speech and academic freedom have really never been more at risk. And all those democratic essentials that concern free speech and open debate are now treated as crimes. I'm sure you have noticed the media coverage of Robert F. Kennedy's campaign. My mind is blown by the shrillness and the unanimity of the media, of our free press, the liberal media. Every single outlet out there, every single newspaper, every single magazine, every TV network, they're all saying the same things, which is a clear indication of propaganda. And it's all hysterically negative about Bobby Kennedy's inclination to question or complicate official narratives, whether it's on vaccination generally, or the COVID vaccines, or Ukraine, or school shootings, you name it, because he departs from the permitted narrative. He is a thought criminal. He is a domestic terrorist. He certainly should not be allowed to debate with Joe Biden. Peter Hotez, the fraud who was telling us all to get vaxxed and boosted for 3 years, and, a guy, everything he said turned out to be dead wrong. He, tweets a Vice article attacking Bobby and Joe Rogan. They invite him on to debate. And of course he weasels out, right? But the media is treating him as courageous.
Right.
And saying he should not debate.
And he's also a victim of harassment.
Oh, he's a victim of harassment, of course. So,
he's a victim of harassment.
Right, I know. Well, no doubt by white supremacists.
Yeah,
they'll harass anyone.
And Russia.
No doubt, Russia. Yeah, but I can't believe that I would. I'm in my early 70s, right? I've seen a lot of things. I never thought I would see the Western press across the board treat debate in a political campaign as a no-no. I mean, this is really reminiscent of the press under Dr. Goebbels, Now, having said that, I could be accused of trivializing the Holocaust, I guess,
That's what they like to do. That's another way they can
well, yeah.
They did that to Bobby Kennedy.
Well, yeah, because he said rightly
about Anne Frank, right?
Right. He said that, if Hitler had the kind of sophisticated surveillance capabilities that they have now, she and her family would not have been able to hide out in the secret annex.
Right.
Where he was, right, immediately accused of trivializing the Holocaust, even of Holocaust denial. And he apologized, which I thought he shouldn't. I mean, I did a Substack post about it. It's not for me to say what he should do, but the fact is he did nothing wrong. He said nothing wrong. God knows he said nothing hateful or even incorrect. But we've come to the point where you really have to watch what you say, and that is reminiscent of life under totalitarianism.
Hey, come see us on tour. We'll be in Baltimore, San Francisco, Huntington Beach, Rosemont, and Chicago, Las Vegas, Salt Lake City, New York City, Pottstown, Pennsylvania, Stamford, Connecticut, and more, and St. Louis. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for all our tickets for all our shows.